Okay, hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Here are 7 big stories for today. It is Thursday, November 14th, 2024. So Republicans have now won the election for the U.S. House of Representatives. There are still some seats to count, but right now they have the 218, so Speaker Johnson is not going anywhere. To 208, there's a half dozen or more that yet to be counted, but it'll just change the majority or minority slightly a little bit, but it's now going to be a Republican House, Republican Senate, and Republican White House. So that's where we are as we're going into this next 4 years. Now, the Biden administration still has a little time to do something useful for Ukraine. We'll see what it can actually pull off, or what it's willing to pull off, may be the better way of talking about this. The Biden administration will seek continued support for Ukraine in 2025, with plans to submit new funding requests to Congress within 2 months. So they're going to ask for another Ukraine aid bill, which they're not going to get. And everybody knows that they're not going to get, but they're doing this. It's almost more of a show than anything else at this point, but we'll see what happens. Concerns grow that Trump may cut military aid to Ukraine after taking office in January of 2025. Okay, President Biden is also going to be meeting with President Xi. U.S. President Biden plans to discuss Russia's war against Ukraine and the potential involvement of North Korean troops during his upcoming meeting with Chinese leader Xi in Peru. Not so sure that that's going to have much of an effect either. Now, there's a term for what happens to a president between the election and the incoming president's inauguration. It's called being a lame duck, and that's what Biden is right now. He's a lame duck. Nobody really cares to listen to a lame duck because he doesn't really have much power to do anything moving forward. At the same time, Scholz, who's been doing whatever Biden's been doing, is dragging his feet again. Scholz drags Ukraine into his election campaign, framing himself as prudent and a peace chancellor who avoided escalation. This must sound terrible to Ukrainians. I understand that. But here he is. He's speaking and saying, I repeat, I am against allowing to fire weapons supplied by us far into Russia. I won't change my position on the tourists. Okay, and again, I think Biden is and Scholz is. They're both saying, I have prevented war with Russia, a broader war. But in their actions, they may be bringing us closer to a broader war with Russia. At the same time, because we're taking a wait and see what Donald Trump is going to do action, South Korea is reconsidering the possibility of directly sending weapons to Ukraine. No decision has yet been made, but they're now pausing, and so it's another 2-month pause that's unnecessarily slowing things down. And it's just painful to see a 3-month pause, a 6-month pause, a 5-month pause, a 2-month pause. It's rough. Okay, meanwhile, in Russia, I talked about how bad things were with the economy yesterday or the day before. Stagflation, bankruptcies, and investment collapse await Russia due to central bank's tight monetary policy. And I talked about the tight monetary policy, and the interest is now 21%. Inflation is greater than 28%. And the ruble to the dollar is further than it's been. It's a really bad scene in Russia. Okay, let's talk about Trump's cabinet. To talk about what Trump's picks are now, it's helpful to go back to the original cabinet that he put in place at the very beginning. It started with Rex Tillerson. Now, Tillerson was the former CEO of ExxonMobil. Got some sense, but he was a little too cozy with the Russians, and eventually he broke with Trump. Steve Mnuchin, a financier, pretty smart guy. James Mattis, 4-star general who was the original Secretary of Defense. James Mad Dog Mattis, excellent leader. He eventually broke with Trump. And then you had Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General. Now, Sessions was from Alabama. He was in Congress, and he was one of the first to really get behind Trump and be all MAGA all the time. And eventually well, Trump kind of broke with him more than he broke with Trump because he wouldn't do some things that Trump wanted him to do. And then you had folks like Elaine Chao. She spoke at one of my graduations. She is Senator McConnell's wife, and she's been in cabinet posts for many years. Ben Carson, who ran for president, Rick Perry, who ran for president. And so you had some pretty significant figures. And here you have John Kelly. He was in charge of Homeland Security. And so that was his original cabinet. Now, in my last video, I talked about the meaning of Pete Hegseth, and we showed that anti-racism is part of what drove people to vote for Trump because they're tired of feeling like anti-racism stuff is just being pushed down their throats. Now, even as I was showing Trump's original cabinet, it struck me that this was the headline. This was in PBS. Trump's cabinet is mostly white and male. What will that mean for policy? This is what I mean about what people were having this allergic reaction to. And this was in 2016. So they've had enough of that, and they're going a different direction. And Hegseth is just the embodiment of, or the poster child for, this allergic reaction that the American population has had to anti-racism being shoved down their throats as they experience it. If you're on the left, you might not experience it that way because you agree with it. But if you're in the center or on the right, you might experience it that way. But it's that domestic issue that's having the effect here. Okay, let's look at the rest of the picks. Representative Elise Stefanik for UN ambassador. Okay, she may be okay for Ukraine. I'm sure she'll be awesome for Israel, but it's yet to be seen. Governor Kristi Noem, the South Dakota governor for Secretary of Homeland Security. Now, this might sound terrible, but I want a guy like a former general who looks like he did bad things to bad people to be in charge of Homeland Security, not Kristi Noem. Now, she's a governor and she probably has some common sense, but she's there because she's all MAGA all the time. Lee Zeldin is also a strong Trump supporter, and he's in charge of Environmental Protection Agency, or they're all nominees. They're not been put in place yet. Senator Marco Rubio. This is the most sane choice of anybody that we've seen so far. Marco Rubio is a conservative who's been saying a little bit more MAGA kind of stuff lately. He's going to be the one that's least well received by the rabid MAGA base. He was Little Marco. Remember that back in 2016 when he ran against Trump and lost to Trump? But he's got some significant bona fides, really hates communism, doesn't like Putin, but he's been saying a little bit more MAGA line kind of things lately. Mike Huckabee as ambassador to Israel, that'll be a good fit. He's a conservative evangelical Christian, but he really supports Israel solidly. They'll get along great in that role. Mike Waltz. I'm really happy about Mike Waltz. He's a national security advisor, former Green Beret. I think he'll do a great job. Then we get down here, Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller is all MAGA all the time. MAGA, 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 MAGA. Like very, very MAGA. Deputy Chief of Staff. Susie Wiles, she was the campaign manager. I don't know much about her views relative to Ukraine, but I can't imagine it's far off of whatever Trump wanted. Tom Homan as border czar. He's in charge of cleaning up the border, making sure the border actually gets finished, making sure that the crossings stop. And he's the right guy for that particular position. Has little to do with anything Ukraine. John Ratcliffe, CIA director. From what I understand, he'll be a good pick for CIA director. Then Pete Hegseth for defense secretary. I did an entire video explaining why he was picked, and it has to do more with domestic U.S. politics than anything about Ukraine. Then you have Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are going to be in this newly created Department of Government Efficiency to go find government waste. Now they're in this newly created Department of Government Efficiency, which is going to try to root out government waste. I don't know what's going to come of that, but it's a popular thing for the MAGA base. Finally, we have Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz. Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence and Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Now that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time on, is talking about these two figures. Okay, so buckle up. Here we go. Both known for their extreme pro-Russian views, Tulsi Gabbard and Matt Gaetz have been appointed as Trump's Director of National Intelligence, that's Tulsi, and U.S. Attorney General, that's Matt. Both positions must pass Senate review. So it is possible that either or both of them could be rejected by the Senate. And there might be enough votes in the Senate that are old school Republicans, old school conservatives like me that would be like, wait, not so much. Now, I'm of the opinion personally that generally speaking, the president should get to pick his team and run with it. But I think these may be bad picks for a couple of reasons that we'll go into. So Trump taps bomb-throwing Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. Lawmakers immediately expressed doubts that Gaetz can get confirmed. He can get confirmed, but the question is, will he? Now remember, Matt Gaetz is the one that gave us the turmoil last year by calling for the vote that took Speaker McCarthy out of the position of Speaker of the House, which eventually brought in Speaker Johnson. Okay? He just had a personal beef with Speaker McCarthy, and that goes out. I'll explain that in just a moment. Now, he had a personal beef with Speaker McCarthy, who wouldn't do something that Gaetz wanted him to do, and, well, it went bad. The Matt Gaetz pick is so crazy that people have forgotten the Tulsi Gabbard pick, which was so crazy that people have forgotten about the Pete Hegseth pick. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? Okay, well, that's one way of looking at it. Here's Republican Representative Max Miller talking about how Gaetz will not be confirmed in the Senate. I don't know whether he will or won't be, but let's hear what he has to say.
I just think it's silly. I believe that the president is probably rewarding him for being such a loyal soldier to the president. But the president is smart enough and his team is smart enough to know that Mr. Gaetz will never get confirmed by the Senate. Mr. Gaetz breaks things to break things, and then once he breaks it even more. And that is somebody who should not be the Attorney General of the United States. I can tell you, I'm not the only one out of 222 that we'll end up with that is happy that he is leaving this conference.
Gaetz is actually a Trump loyalist who's being put there to break things. That fits very well with what MAGA wants to accomplish, to go punch the teeth in of the deep state, of the system. And I think that's explanatory. Let's go on to another video. This is a Republican senator now speaking about Matt Gaetz.
You got to think about this guy. This is a guy that the media didn't give a time of day to after he was accused of sleeping with an underage girl. And there's a reason why no one in the conference came and defended him, because we had all seen the videos he was showing on the House floor that all of us had walked away of the girls that he had slept with. He'd brag about how he would crush ED medicine and chase it with an energy drink so he could go all night. This is obviously before he got married. And so when that accusation came out, no one defended him, and then no one on the media would give him a time of the day. All of a sudden, he found fame because he opposed the Speaker of the House back in November, and he's always stayed there. And he was never going to leave until he got this last moment of fame by going after a motion to vacate.
Okay, so what's he talking about? Well, so now that he's been nominated, he actually removed himself from Congress, and that's what we're talking about. So Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida, he resigned from Congress, which came 2 days before the House Ethics Committee was set to vote on releasing a highly damaging report outlining its investigation into the Republican, according to multiple sources familiar with the probe. The committee planned to vote Friday on releasing the report. The ethics loses its jurisdiction over Gaetz when he leaves Congress. The Ethics Committee, they can't do anything once he actually leaves Congress. So he was just nominated, then he resigned. Now, if he doesn't get nominated, or if he doesn't get confirmed by the Senate, then he still dodges these ethics charges. Now, these same ethics charges are what caused him, because the Speaker of the House at the time would not drop the charges. He was going to prosecute it, and then it kind of fell apart after he was ousted. That was Speaker McCarthy. And for that reason, according to Speaker McCarthy, that's why Gaetz called the vote on McCarthy. Okay, which plunges into that whole turbulent time about a year ago. Okay, Tulsi Gabbard. Now, Tulsi Gabbard is a former lieutenant colonel in the Army National Guard. And she was also a congresswoman in Hawaii. And she's up for Director of National Intelligence. Now, as a congresswoman, she did sit on the Committee for Homeland Security and the Subcommittee for the Border and Maritime Security, Committee on Armed Services, Committee on Foreign Affairs. Okay, so, I mean, there is something there, but she's also just expressed all kinds of sympathy for Russia. And so that seems like a bad place for someone who has that kind of sympathy. Now, I want to clarify something. We have to be fair. Even when we don't like something, we have to be fair. So I see this, Republicans Against Trump says, Trump's nominee for DNI rushed to Twitter to blame the United States and NATO, not Putin, for the war. And she did. Here's what she said. This war and suffering could have easily been avoided if Biden administration/NATO had simply acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns regarding Ukraine's becoming a member of NATO, which would mean U.S. and NATO forces right on Russia's border. That was on 2/23/22, the next day. So that's a terrible place for her to be. But to say, and I see a lot of this saying, she's a Russian asset, she's paid by the Kremlin. You can't go there. That's not necessarily so. It might be, but I doubt it. I think she just has this perspective. That's why Tucker had her on Fox News all the time to talk about their shared perspective that was very heavily pro-Russian. So that's Gabbard. Vlad Vexler says Tulsi Gabbard is ex-left. She was formerly in the Democratic Party. In fact, she ran for president in the Democratic Party and didn't get very far. This is a category common among content creators where you start with Bernie Sanders and little by little, through algorithmic incentives, end up adopting the talking points of ex-conservatives who are authoritarian populists in conservative clothes. Good. I'm glad that he pointed that out, because the MAGA authoritarian populist type is not conservative. What they're actually trying to do is push conservatives as neocons or warmongers out of these positions of power, and it looks like they're having some success. I was very happy with Waltz. I'm very unhappy with Gabbard and Gaetz. Now, David Frum, who's a significant figure in conservative circles, has said Trump is about to waste a lot of time, energy, and political capital on fights that will end badly for the incoming administration. That may very well be what happens. I just don't have the data, but there's going to be a lot of friction moving forward. Now, that was a lot of yuck. I'm going to try to end on a happier note. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will lead new Department of Government Efficiency in Trump administration. And Darth Putin says appointing 2 people to do 1 job is a good start to the Department of Government Efficiency. It's kind of a good point. And then finally, there was this video where we couldn't hear what Speaker McCarthy and Matt Gaetz were saying once upon a time. This was a little over a year ago, and they really didn't like each other. They were clashing. This before he called for the vote to replace Speaker McCarthy. But there's an awesome channel called Bad Lip Reading that tells us exactly what was being said, and we're going to hear that.
What does a gopher build? Can you say it? Well, who knows? A really rich doctor said you were a bummer. And I think you don't know algebra. No, we're talking science, bud. The science of what? Is that a tiger? One of your friends promised me I could flick you in your face. Absolutely, you may not do that.
Hit him in his cringy smirk, for real.
Say any cereal name. Cinnamon Toast Crunch. You're like people in the 12th century. Why'd he say it like that? You're a formulated pickle popper.
The storm cloud.
I don't like you, dude. And there's a tiger. Oh, that's it. You 2 guys sent the tiger.
I did not me.
What tiger? That is reprehensible.
Okay, yeah. Okay,
Brad?
I'm a horrible person.
Brad, I'll report you to Nadine. I just want your leg bones to be okay. I brought the tiger. You got somebody on the organ now?
Okay, my friends, that's all that I have today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. I know that some of this wasn't comforting today, but I'm trying to provide as clear a perspective as I can. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.